All right, guys. Well, I'm going to talk about something which is quite different. It's got nothing to do with Turkey. I initially intended to do this with an Egyptian member, but we couldn't get round to getting someone to volunteer. So I'm going to have a go at myself. We're going to talk about a grounding of a large container ship in the Suez Canal in March last year and its ramifications on international trade. So I hope you find it interesting. This gives you a flavor of what we'll be talking about, a huge container ship grounded in the Suez Canal, blocking the traffic. You all know about the Suez Canal, but it stretches 120 miles. It's the gateway between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, and it accommodates 12% of the global marine traffic. It's one of the most important waterways in global trade because it provides a faster, safer, and cost-efficient transportation between Europe and Asia compared to an alternative route, which would be via the Cape of Good Hope. The red trace on this graph shows you the volume of shipping traffic between Asia and Europe through the Suez Canal. And the orange and green trace shows you the volume via the Cape of Good Hope. And as you will note, the majority of the traffic, which is the red concentrated line, uses the Suez Canal for reasons which I'll come to a little later. Have a look at this. Let's take a vessel that's traveling from Kaohsiung in Taiwan to Rotterdam. It has two alternative routes. The first is through the Suez Canal, which is the green line. And the second is the red line, which is via the Cape of Good Hope. Now, the difference in terms of distance is about, 7,000 kilometers. If you look at the top of the graph, a vessel using the Suez Canal will travel 18,500 kilometers in 25.5 days. Whereas if the vessel uses the other route, the red route, it will travel 25,000 kilometers in 34 days. So there's a difference of 10 days. Let's look at another example, which is more important and more striking. A vessel departing from the port of Mersin in the south coast of Turkey, traveling to Shanghai at an average speed of 13 knots. The time difference becomes 24 days, and the difference in distance becomes over 7,000 nautical miles. And this demonstrates what I've just said. On this graph, number one is the port of Mersin, and the vessel traveling through the Suez Canal to Shanghai. And if you get the bottom, it will travel 7,500 kilometers in 24.3 days. And here is the striking information. If she uses the route via the Cape of Good Hope instead of the Suez Canal, then she will travel 14,500 kilometers in 47 days. So there's a huge difference in terms of distance and time used. Let's look at the vessel. Now, the Ever Given is a huge container ship. It's 217,600 gross tons. It can carry 20,124 40-foot containers, and it's 400 meters long, 58.8 meters wide, and a height of 60 meters. So it's a huge, huge vessel. At the time of her grounding, she was carrying 18,300 containers, and the value of the cargo in those containers is estimated to be around $1 billion. It was carrying cargo for companies like IKEA, Dell, and Caterpillar. So some of the goods in the containers were of high value. This shows you some other dimensions of the vessel traveling through the Suez Canal. Now let's look at the incident. This took place on the 13th of March last year. She sailed from Tanjung in Malaysia, bound for Rotterdam to discharge cargo. On the 23rd, she reached the northern entry of the Suez Canal to commence her passage. At that time, visibility was poor due to a dust storm with winds reaching speeds of 45 miles per hour. And on the photo on the right shows you her position at that time. Considering her vast dimensions with strong winds, the surface area where the winds met the hull of the vessel created a sail effect. And as the winds intensified, it is calculated that the pushing force generated on the vessel's broadside by the winds was equivalent to being pushed by 3 harbor-sized tugs running on full power, and I can assure you that that's a huge force on the vessel. The right-hand side shows the dimensions of the vessel compared to some buildings and the Titanic. The automatic identification system data extracted from the vessel showed that she was struggling to proceed on a stable course in the Suez Canal, and she was buffeting through the port and starboard sides. As she started to overcome the course between the embankments, the compressed water between the vessel's hull and the embankment on her port side pushed her bow against each side of the bank. The pushing force generated by the wind made it very difficult for the crew and the pilots to correct her course and to keep her stable. And at 7:42, she ran aground on her bow, followed by her stern lodging on the other side of the embankment due to the momentum. And this is the photo which I've showed before. This was her position when she grounded. This is a simulation photo. And this is a picture taken at the time in her grounded position with tugs pushing her, trying to salve her. The Suez Canal Authority has obviously monopoly to try and salve vessels that are in trouble in the Suez Canal, but they were unsuccessful because this was a very large vessel and it required special techniques and special equipment. So they were unable to salve her. So they relied on the services of professional salvors. This is a simulation of the ship from her entrance to the Suez Canal until she grounded. And I'll leave you to look at this at your time because it's quite a long simulation. It runs to about 12-13 minutes. So I'm not going to spend time looking at it now. And this again shows the sheer size of the ship, the excavator trying to free her. As I mentioned, the Canal Authority was unable to move her, so they instructed the services of Smith Salvage, Nippon Salvage, and Switzer, who are some of the very professional international salvors, to free her, and it took 6 days to get her out of that position. And this shows a diagram of her grounded position. After 6 days, on the 29th of March, the salvors were able to free her from the embankments, but it was not until the 7th of July, some 112 days later, that she was able to reach her destination. And I will come to why that was a little later. Let's look at the vessel traffic that accumulated on both sides of the canal because of this grounding. There's an average of 52 vessels that use the canal each day. As a result of this incident, the vessels accumulated on both sides, and it's reported that there were about 422 ships that waited at the end of the salvage operations. This shows you the ships that have accumulated on both sides of the Suez Canal, both in the Mediterranean and in the Red Sea. The NASA satellite images showed accumulation of shipping traffic that extended to some 100 kilometers in the Red Sea. And here's a satellite picture. On the 1st of February, you can see that there is little traffic. Moving on to 27th March, there's 72 kilometers long queue. And then on 29th March, it extends to 100 kilometers. Another photo of the accumulation of traffic. According to data from Lloyd's List, the blockage was holding up an estimated 9.6 billion United States dollars worth of trade along the waterway. Let's look at the nature and quantum of the losses incurred out of this incident. Now, after she was refloated, the authority detained her and claimed its losses resulting from the incident, and they claimed that these were about $900 million. They demanded security before they would allow the vessel to leave. The authority claimed that its losses consisted of loss of reputation, salvage, and loss of income. To give you some idea why this figure was reached, the daily income from the canal is estimated to be around $15 to $20 million. That's how much the Canal Authority receives from the use of the canal by a number of vessels. And again, to give you an idea how much it would cost a vessel of the size of Ever Given to use the canal, this is roughly $800,000. Following lengthy negotiations, the authority reduced its claim to $550 million, but later a settlement was reached, but that was not disclosed, so we are unable to tell you how much the claim settled for, but I would expect it to settle for several $100 million. A huge loss for the Canal Authority, which they claim from the ship. The vessel arrived at Rotterdam with 4 months delay, so you can imagine the number of claims that have arisen because of the delay from the owners of the cargo inside the containers. There were lots of claims, and still some of them ongoing. It is expected that these claims will run into tens of millions of dollars. And there was also, of course, a lot of disruption caused to international trade. The incident was just the tip of the iceberg, as the extent of the disruption caused by the canal's blockage created a global issue for manufacturers, carriers, and consumers. On the right-hand side, you will see the types of vessels in this diagram, in this graph, that were held up because of this grounding: bulk carriers, container ships, chemical tankers, general cargo ships, crude oil carriers, vehicle carriers, LNG and LPG tankers, etc. 6 days of blockage on a waterway housing 12% of the global trade products transported between Asia and Europe created a ripple effect on the global supply chain, on oil prices, on freight costs, and many others. And as I mentioned a little earlier, the impact of this is huge because this grounding, in effect, exposed the fragility of the global trade, as the vessel was holding up $9 billion of commodity for each day that she remained grounded in the canal. One of the most rapid effects of the blockade presented itself as fluctuations in oil prices. Given that nearly 1.5 million barrels of crude oil passed through the Suez each day, there were fears of delay in the supply chains as the canal remained blocked for 6 days, and a number of oil tankers remained idle at the entrance of the canal. Of course, crude oil is not the only product which is transited through the Suez Canal. There is also 700 barrels of naphtha, which is a derivative of crude oil used to manufacture a variety of products from plastic to jet fuel, and 8% of the daily global LNG trade passed through the canal each day. So the impact was huge. And lastly, to give you a final figure on the impact of the grounding, which lasted 6 days, blocking the Suez, it was estimated that $54 billion of trade losses have been reported as a result of the incident. So a huge impact on international trade and transportation. Thank you very much for listening.
Zihni, it's a wonderful job. You should do this more often.
Thank you,
well, very well presented, structured, and you just seamlessly went through it.
Yeah, I would have hoped to have been joined by a colleague from Egypt, because then I would have liked to have known more about the ramifications on Egypt as well. I was not able to cover that, of course. I was more concentrating on international impact of this incident, but it shows you how important these waterways are. I mean, this is one of two most important waterways in the world. The other is Panama. So I thought it would be a good topic to cover when I realized the cost to international trade of this grounding.
Well, Anna, for me, it was very interesting knowledge, and I have a couple of questions. And
Yeah.
I'm sure maybe Manolis, for example, he's in the maritime law specialization. He'd probably have a lot of input as well. But my first questions, if you don't mind my starting. So the Suez Canal, the STA authority, it sued or asked for compensation from the boat. Did any authority seek any compensation from the Suez Canal itself because of the delay, or is it all falling on the burden of the boat and its owners?
Yeah, ordinarily, if you're going to bring a claim in a situation like this, you would directly claim against the responsible party. Here, there was no fault on the part of the canal authority. The negligence on the part was on the part of the ship. Of course, this is perhaps too much detail, but there was a pilot on board. But pilots are normally servants of the ship and the master. As a result, the claims were directed against the ship and the owners of the ship, and of course, indirectly against their underwriters and insurers. So I don't believe there were any claims directed against the Suez Canal Authority, but that is something that I'm not able to comment on without obviously on-the-ground knowledge.
And
your second question?
Yeah, and as you said, so mostly all of this damage is probably covered by the insurance and underwriters.
That's correct, yes. And of course, again, a bit too much detail, but there is a limitation of liability because there's a convention in place. So ship owners are able to limit their liability. So the ship owner would create a fund, a limitation fund, which is calculated based on the tonnage, the gross tonnage of the vessel. So let's say it was 150 million. They would then deposit that into a port. I don't know where they deposit that fund, but that was the maximum liability that the ship owner can be responsible for, and all the claimants must direct their claims against that fund. So if the claims exceed that fund, they are unable to recover anything above that figure.
Well, excuse me, but I'm not so informed about how the industry works, but thank you for that quick explanation.
Zihni, were you involved in any of the litigation?
No, I wasn't. No.
Okay.
Zihni, one question. The first one is the pilot was not named Schettino, not at all.
No, sorry, pilot was not named, did you say?
The pilot's name is not Schettino.
I don't know.
No, okay. No, serious question. You mentioned that most of the damage would have been applied to the evergreen ownership, okay, and not to the authorities of the canal. In this case, is there any exception about force majeure because of the wind, or it is not entering into this type of event?
There was no discussion about whether it fell within force majeure. Obviously, that's a very good question, because normally, if I was defending the ship owner, I would have investigated whether it's something that I could bring within force majeure. Clearly, as you know, the containers are carried subject to what we call bills of lading contracts of carriage. So there would be force majeure provisions in those bills of lading. I have not seen any of them, but obviously it's very difficult to bring a claim of this nature within force majeure. But if it was something that I could rely on, then clearly in cases of high winds where it might have this sort of consequence, the canal should have been closed. So from that perspective, the ship owner would also be able to bring the Suez Canal Authority into play and try and shift some of the responsibility to the Canal Authority. But there was no discussion about whether this fell within the force majeure. And to be honest, if there was such discussion, I would have known about it. I would have heard about it.
I see, I see.
That is a potential defense, yes.
And another point, I don't have any idea, any clue, but in this type of business, this type of situation, for instance, when there is such a huge ship, okay, is it normal to have an SPV or a specific company who is owning the ship so that the owner or the group owning the participating company segregates the risk? And what is this case?
Yeah, I mean that's quite a frequent practice in shipping, as Manolis will know. Usually, even large ship owners create single ship owning companies to avoid liability being extended to other ship owning companies within the same group. So if you want to hold the other ship owning companies within the group responsible, you would have to pierce the corporate veil. But in this situation, given the size of the company, given their their name, which they wanted to protect, I doubt very much that this is something they would want to rely on. But in any event, as I mentioned earlier, there is a convention on the ability of ship owners to limit their liability. We call it the London Convention of 1976, with additional protocols that came into force later, so that the ship owner can actually limit its liability. So notwithstanding that there were hundreds of millions of dollars of losses, the ship owner is only responsible for the limits. Anything above that, I'm afraid, no one can access. So the limitation fund is shared between all the claimants.
Okay, and this fund is besides the insurance refund, or it is a cap, an overall cap?
No, that's the maximum liability that the ship owner and its insurers will face.
Okay, I see. Thank you, Zihni.
Can I just ask, Zihni, I don't understand, if there was a cap of whatever it was, how come they ended up paying 500 million or an undisclosed sum to the Suez Canal? Or was the Suez Canal not bound by that limit?
The Suez Canal would be bound. I don't know what the limitation figure was, Catherine.
Oh, okay.
I would have thought that because given that the claim was initially 900 million, later reduced to 550, and then settled for an undisclosed amount, I am assuming that there was a deal struck with the Suez Canal Authority, and it is possible that the ship owner agreed to leave that, or to carve out the claim of the Canal Authority from the limitation fund. I don't know the details of that, so I am unable to answer it, I'm afraid.
Okay, thanks.
But but the Canal Authority's claim would also fall within the limitation fund under the convention.
Can I thank Zihni for this presentation? It was very nice, very vivid, and
Thank you, Manolis.
and most informative. I would agree with everything. I just want to make a couple of points, especially to what Fulvio said. I would support Zihni's view that it is in fact a rule in the maritime industry that there are single vessel SPVs which own the vessels, and if they are part of a larger group, then they are bound with another SPV, which is the managing company, which is in fact the one which operates the vessel, and they are bound to, each of the ship owning companies is bound with this management company through management agreements. And this is more or less roughly how it works. And I think one issue for the accident, for the incident, is that it was high winds, and the vessel was, due to her size, was very much exposed to those winds. And in addition, it had no bow thrusters in the sides. Bow thrusters are some auxiliary propellers which assist the vessel in maneuvering. And so the vessel was not able to maneuver in such a way. So they did that. And so nature created the incident, and nature also helped to end it, because it was high flood, which assisted also the salvage companies to to allow the vessel leave from grounding. And to end, just an example of the huge impacts that were experienced in that was that, of course, delays in every port. And what impressed me was that when I read that there were delays in the port of Wien in Austria. So it's a river port, and they were expecting commodities there, and they had a very big, I think, a delay of a month and a half to that, just to illustrate, let alone the big ports. Thank you, Zihni, again for this presentation.
Pleasure, Manolis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to stop recording.